Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 21 Hats podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Feldman. This week, Paul Downs, Jay Goltz, and Sarah Segal talk about sexual harassment and where you draw the line with employees. Is it sexual harassment for one employee to ask another for a date? Is it sexual harassment to ask twice? Does it make sense to have a policy of zero tolerance? Or is it better to leave room for discretion and judgment? The conversation was sparked by a recent situation Jay experienced with an employee who had been with the company for almost 3 decades, having started at the age of 17. It was a very sad thing, Jay tells us. Plus, Sarah Segal asks whether it's better to build her business on a bunch of small clients or a smaller number of large clients. And is being CEO a health risk? We begin the episode by talking about an eye-catching story the Wall Street Journal recently published, noting that an increasing number of CEOs have been dying on the job, presumably because of the heightened levels of stress. I asked the 3 CEOs on the episode if they've been taking care of themselves, but they weren't having it. Instead of thanking me for my concern, they chided me for highlighting an article they consider complete BS, which, of course, is what we love about these guys. They call them the way they see them. Even in good times, owning and running a business can be a lonely pursuit. Our hope is that these weekly conversations, brought to you by our principal sponsor, The Great Game of Business, will let owners know they are not alone in facing challenges. Same thing with our daily newsletter, the 21 Hats Morning Report, which Inc. magazine named the best newsletter for business owners and which you can subscribe to for free at 21hats.com, where you can also find transcripts of our podcast episodes and lots of other articles and interviews. Joining me this week on the podcast are regulars Paul Downs, CEO of Paul Downs Cabinet Makers, which is based outside of Philadelphia and makes custom conference tables. Jay Goltz, CEO of the Goltz Group, whose companies in Chicago include a picture frame business, artist frame service, and a home furnishing store, Jason Home. And Sarah Segal, who's founder and CEO of Segal Communications, a public relations firm based in San Francisco. The episode is titled, I Had to Fire the Guy. Welcome, Paul, Jay, and Sarah. It's great to have you here. I want to start today with a Wall Street Journal story that I recently highlighted in the morning report. It's about how being CEO can be hazardous to your health. In fact, more CEOs died in office in 2023 than in any year since 2010. Not surprisingly, the story focused on the stress of the job, on people working too hard, on not taking care of themselves. And right after I published it, I got an email from a regular on this podcast who said she's been really sick since Monday. She can't walk up a flight of stairs, but she has a meeting scheduled with her biggest client. Which leads me to ask, are you guys taking care of yourselves?
Can we talk about the article first? Because I have to tell you, what kind of journalism is it? 19 out of 100, out of 10,000, out of a million? What if the average CEO is 58 years old, the odds of them dying in a year is 1%. So what kind of context is that? 19 CEOs died.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Jay. It's complete bullshit.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Well, the 19 number is ridiculous. All they told us is that the number went up. But that doesn't mean that there isn't an issue here with CEOs stressing themselves.
No, you're leaving out the fact that in the last 10 years, the baby boomers are now getting older. And for all we know, the average age of the CEO has gotten older and that it's turning now because I'm a middle baby boomer. I'm 67. The average age of the CEOs might have gone up over the last few years, and it will start to go down as the baby boomers are retiring. So there's so many things missing from that to act like this actually means something, I think is kind of silly because they gave us no information.
I was also struck by the source of some of the data. It was from Chief, which is like a women's group. I mean, to me, I just looked at that and went, oh, they did some sort of survey so they could get PR out of it.
Yes. And I don't like using this phrase, but it sure seems like fake news.
Yeah, I mean, the down at the bottom or in the middle of it, here we go. Most of the more than 1,600 CEOs in the study lived into their 80s, longer than average for the general population, but shorter in some cases than they might have lived with less stress. Well, there you have it, folks. A, my headline is not true, and B, if it is, I can't prove it. So what kind of story is that?
So there's also the question is like the average CEO, the lifespan and the career span of a CEO usually tends to be pretty short. CMOs as well. They like the average job duration is like 16 months to 2 years, maybe. So it's like, how do these short-term gigs add up? Probably it's the stress of the job, but bouncing from job to job as well provides a level of anxiety and stress for a lot of these folks.
It's a bad control because the fact is the average quote-unquote CEO has top-notch medical care, probably doesn't smoke cigarettes, probably. So it's a non-controlled study that has absolutely, I don't know how you can draw any conclusions from that.
There was one point in the article that did sit with me a little bit, and it's how female CEOs tend to suffer in silence a little bit more than men. I was listening to, I don't know, some podcast or a TikTok the other day, and was talking about how, women, if they indicate that they are, dealing with any health or mental issues as a leader, I feel like that there's still a double standard in terms of expectation. Like, oh, she's weak, as opposed to a male CEO who it would just be like, well, it's a stressful job, but that's just my kind of novice perspective.
So I think everything you guys are saying makes perfect sense to me. You're raising legitimate criticisms of the story, but I doubt you're suggesting that the whole phenomenon is wrong. I mean, there's a lot of stress in these jobs.
What I would say is that I think pinpointing stress and jobs to a particular title is wrong, because my mother became ill and passed away, and she had a very high stress job. And we always thought that the demands of her job and the stress that she felt impacted her physical well-being. And I think that that's across the board. It doesn't have to be a CEO. It could be a CFO. It could be, a rank and file person.
It could be a doctor.
A doctor, right? 100%.
Yeah, I think that if you compare the stress of being a CEO to the stress of being a single mom who's got to take a bus between 3 part-time jobs where they never tell her at the beginning of the week when she's working, I'll take CEO any day.
Absolutely.
I just don't think that this is a meaningful article. It's just clickbait.
All right, so let's talk about a...
Got anything else for us, Lauren?
Yes, I
do. Poor Lauren. Sorry.
Wait a second. Don't apologize. This is what we're here for. We're here to bring reality to every situation that can affect the running of a business. So you guys are providing a service. All right, let's talk about real stress. Jay, you recently had a stressful situation with an employee, a longtime employee, who got in trouble and forced you to make some difficult decisions. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Not much for his own privacy, but with me 29 years since he was 17 years old, and falls under the category of sexual harassment. And it was just a difficult situation, of which there's some lessons from this. Sexual harassment, if you think that it's not happening at your company, maybe it isn't, maybe it is. It's if you've got 30, 50, 100, I got 130 employees, it's a problem. And you can have all the training you want, which we do the training, but it's very difficult. And one of the worst phrases ever made in my mind usually is zero tolerance, because it takes out judgment. And the fact is, things are not always black and white. Is it sexual harassment for someone to ask someone out for a date? Is it sexual harassment when they ask them twice? Is it sexual harassment when they close the door and they grab their arm? It's not black and white. And anyone who goes, well, people should speak up, I fully understand that, especially for a woman, it is very difficult to speak up. It's embarrassing. They're worried about getting in trouble. They're worried about losing their job. It's very complicated. And then they worry about, the manager is tight with the owner, so they're not going to do anything. At the end of the day, I had to fire the guy, and it was very sad, very sad, very sad.
You did the right thing. I mean, it's a hard thing, but you have to, as the owner, I mean, it all comes down to you. If you hadn't acted, then I think that the risk of being held liable for something would have been too high.
That's part of it. Let me tell you the other part. What does this say to the rest of the employees? That's a problem. It's both with the risk with the one employee, but then you got to take a stand sometimes because everybody's watching this stuff and it's a problem. And I will also tell you that, which is all part of why we do this podcast. Did I sleep that night? Yeah. Like, I got to tell you, I'm a warrior. I've had to fire people for all kinds of reasons over the years. And like, it was a very sad moment with him and he was very upset, didn't argue with it. But if you're in business and you've got a lot of employees, you better just toughen up because this stuff happens. If it's not this, it's something else. And I haven't had one in many years that was personal like this, where I knew the guy for a long time. But like, whatever, I do what I got to do, and I'm not whining about it.
Jay, was it obvious to you that you had to take this action?
Here's why. This does make it black and white. This wasn't the first time. 10 years ago, there was something else, and that's why it wasn't that hard, because it's like, okay, I'm big with second chances. I'm not big with third chances. And if it wouldn't have happened before, maybe the outcome would have been different. But this is the second round, and like, enough. Just, yeah.
I was going to ask what the timeline was on all of this. How long did this drag out?
Take?
Yeah.
It starts, and I don't think this is unusual. We had to fire a coworker of hers who just wasn't doing the job, blah, blah, blah. And she decided to be the whistleblower, and she's the one that made the complaint and then revealed that he was harassing so-and-so, and that's how we found out about it. So then we interviewed the person, and she told us the whole story. We immediately suspended him while we were doing this investigation, and the whole thing took a couple weeks. And I might add, my daughter-in-law is a labor attorney, and she does this for a living, investigations. I didn't bring a lawyer in because I didn't think it was necessary, and it wasn't. But it took a couple weeks, but we immediately took action.
Normally, if I have an employee who is misbehaving in some way, we have a procedure to tell them what the problem is, what the solution is, how we're going to help them. But they get a second chance in many cases.
Sure.
And I'm curious whether sexual harassment, sort of in a not like an obvious grabbing someone and whatever,
right,
but just a remark or something, whether that's something that it's okay to give that person a second chance, or are we in a world where you basically got to get rid of them immediately?
No. That's why I started out with this zero tolerance. I don't believe that phrase. I'm sure there's some cases. I think that phrase is overused. I don't think it's practical. If someone makes a bad comment, yes, I absolutely believe they get one warning. It's just not that complicated. You get one. People say stupid stuff. Men, women, it happens. But to your point, yeah, they grab them. Okay, there's certainly some stuff that, yeah, that's it. I got to tell you, somebody calls someone a racial slur, that probably would be it. I don't know that that's a warrantable offense because I don't think you can undo the damage from that. So I'm not saying there aren't things that aren't zero tolerance, but not many.
What's the complaint process for your company?
Well, I have an HR person, which most companies don't, because until you have 100 people, the fact of the matter is 99% of small companies don't have an HR person because they're not big enough to justify. So I do have an HR person. They would either go to the HR person or they would tell their manager, and then the manager would go to HR, and then we would do an investigation on it. It hasn't happened a lot because, we do try to keep an eye on things. Am I torturing myself on, this was going on too long, we should have known about it? That's easy to say, but what's going on in an office, I'm not going to indict my other managers because I don't know that they had any reason to think this was going on.
Jay, do you have a policy about dating or not dating?
Now that's interesting you asked that because 40 years ago, there's no dating here. And like, you know what? Why don't you make a policy that the sun can't come up anymore because I don't like it. It's too bright in my eye. I don't know that you can have a policy that says there's no dating at work. You can try, and I have tried, but I just don't know if that's practical. And I will tell you, I've had 5 people that were dating here that got married over the last 45 years. Of the 5, 2 were really disruptors of the company, caused major problems, and I had to fire the people. And they were married. It was a blow up. But there were some others that they got married. I don't know that you can do that. You can try.
Do companies really do that anymore? Is that normal? Like,
I don't think so.
To prevent people from having a personal, I would think
right.
that would be.
How would you even do that?
Yeah. I can remember that when I first started in my career, there were weird things. Like I worked for a company that men were not allowed to have facial hair. Women were not allowed to wear pants.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're allowed to date within the company.
Just on a practical sense, you're not going to stop it. Who are we kidding? You're just not going to stop it. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I mean, so the question is, do you try to put a policy that is reasonable? Like the boss certainly shouldn't be dating the employee. That one is a black and white one.
When you say the boss, Jay, you're not referring just to you. You're talking about managers.
No, I'm talking about the manager or supervisor. I mean, you see it on the cop shows all the time where they're dating the other cop.
You're watching a lot of TV, Jay.
Well, I know. I got to do something to get my mind off of business. So I think you could have some policies about that, but it's very naive to think, oh, I'm just going to put a policy, there's no dating at work, and think that's going to hold, because I know it's not.
I think these days, most people are kind of aware of the risk they're taking. Like if somebody was dating someone farther down in the power structure, that is a risk.
That TV show Jennifer Aniston's in, Morning Show, everybody that's in business should have to watch that, because it's extremely painful to watch what happened in the company. And Steve Carell is the big boss, and it's extremely painful. And you realize that sometimes the boss just doesn't understand what they're doing.
No, that never happens, Jay.
I love that you analyze everything based on a television show.
Well, it's just not everything on the TV show, but I certainly learn things from TV once in a while.
Jay, back to the matter at hand for just a moment here. You said, I think, that this person had been at the company for 29 years. I think started when he was 17. You had a personal relationship with him. I'm curious, were you involved in the firing? Did you do it yourself?
No, that's a good question. I stayed out of it. Everybody took care of it. But I feel a responsibility, because I don't want to say we. I'm always balancing being the boss and humanity. I try to be the best human I can be, at the same time be a boss. There's a balancing act going on there. So I thought it would be irresponsible and cruel to just have him go on and not say something. So I went over there. I waited for it to get done. I called him into the room by myself with him. And I said to him, look, I'm not mad at you, because I know that would torture him. I'm very sad this happened and you made some real bad choices, but I want you to know, pick yourself up, dust yourself off. And I gave him a hug, and he sobbed like a baby and said, you're like a father to me. It was a very sad thing. But I have to tell you, compared to me 20, 30 years ago, there was no second thoughts in my head. I didn't think, oh my God, what are you doing? I knew it was the right thing, and I was sorry for him, but he screwed up twice. Like I said, if it was once, I don't know that I would have done it.
Do you do a soft landing package for somebody like that?
I've absolutely given lots of severance payout in my life. It just in the last few years, I had a couple people that left after years for various reasons. But in this case, it was not appropriate to go give him months of, it just wasn't. So I gave him some severance pay, but not what I would have given him if it was like, gee, you're over your head or whatever. I mean, I'm pretty generous with severance pay, but I wasn't in this case because I don't think it's appropriate.
Would you give him a reference?
That's another good question. Yes, my manager gave him a very lovely, he was here for X amount of years. He was great at this and this and this, and he left to pursue a new opportunity. I have zero guilt about it. I feel like I owed it to him. And if somebody's dumb enough to hire someone after 29 years that's out of work and doesn't think to pick up the phone, that's their problem.
Well, if somebody calls you, what are you going to say?
First of all, here's the fun part that you should know. No one's going to call me. Trust me. Trust me. I've been in business 45 years. I've gotten 4 reference calls, hundreds of employees. People don't generally, not everybody. Most companies don't do reference calls, which is insane as far as I'm concerned. So, if somebody calls the manager and they say, well, why did he leave? I don't think we're going to go say what happened. This is part of the business game. You're supposed to figure it out. If I had a resume from someone after 29 years and they're not working and they're looking for a job, I'd be saying there's something wrong here. And I would interview the person and say, I got to tell you, this doesn't make any sense. What's the real story? And they usually tell me. So it's tricky, but I felt good giving him a letter. I don't want him to not work. He worked very hard. He was very dedicated to the company. I want him to get a job. Do I think he'll do it again? I would hope not. I would think not. And be clear, it's not like he did something horrendous. That's another story. I'd have him arrested if that was the case, but that wasn't the case. It was the asking out and the not letting up on it thing.
Did you feel you had to offer some explanation to other employees?
Yeah, you know what? I really wasn't involved personally, but yeah, sure. I think that's a controversy in the world. There are some people, and this is an opinion, there are some people that think you got to keep everything private. And though I think Jack Welch, may he rest in peace, was a horrible human being, I once watched him say that he thinks you owe it to the rest of the employees to let people know what's going on. I don't disagree with that part. I think you owe some explanation. Otherwise, they make up their own story, and I don't think that's healthy. So, yeah, everyone knows what was going on to a degree. That's a tricky one, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you're trying to balance personal privacy with other people that work there thinking like, what do you mean so-and-so doesn't work? What happened? And then somebody can make up, I think it's because, remember that order last year? I mean, they can everyone draws their own conclusion, and that's not healthy for your environment.
Well, that's one of my rules. You always have to provide a story. Otherwise, someone will make something up and it may be way worse than what actually happened.
Yeah, for sure.
So I haven't had too many situations like this. But when I terminated someone, I made it clear to the rest of them that we'd done this because I want them to know, A, there's things you can do that will get you fired. But B, that I did it because I wanted to defend the integrity of the group. I usually fire people because I think that what they're up to is something that the group won't tolerate more than I won't tolerate.
Now, do you have any women working for you?
I do now. It's been an interesting year. The last 3 hires I've made have been women, so we now have more on the shop floor than we've ever had. We have another one starting on Monday. And I believe it's going okay.
This might give you an opportunity to have a whole new experience down the road.
Could be. We'll see. I mean, I'm certainly on my eyes are open for issues because I think that it's good to have people who didn't used to work in wood shops now be available to work in them. Like, I'm going to need workers. I want whoever's out there who wants to do the job, and it's easier to get the next hire to see what we're all about when there's not just a bunch of white guys out there.
I can tell you the profound difference between me now and me at 30 years old. I have had to deal with some really uncomfortable, sticky problems with employees. And I used to say, oh my God, they don't teach us in business school. Why do I have to deal with that? And now I understand. If you're in business, you have employees. This is part of it. You're dealing with human beings. They're coming to work. And I don't complain about it. I don't whine about it. It is what it is. And I accept that if you're in business, yes, you are going to have to sometimes play psychologist and you're going to sometimes have to play dad or mom. And there's a limit, though, obviously. How far will you go for an employee who's having a hard time? Paul, we've talked about that. I certainly cut some slack and we'll give it a month or two to see if we can fix it. So I do balance the humanity part with the business part, but you got to make sure you got that balance right. Because if you go too far to the humanity part, you're going to end up with a lot of pissed off customers and pissed off employees. And if you go too far to the other side, I just don't want to live in that world that I don't want to be Jack Welch. I mean, he was heartless.
I have a question for you guys. How deep into people's relationships do you get? Like, I've kind of learned along the way where it's like I have a relationship with my staff, but like I don't get into the weeds. I don't really need to know the day-to-day necessarily because I have found that in the past that can complicate things where there's this assumption that because I understand something that they're going through, that I am going to have a lot more flexibility in terms of deliverables because I've been looped into things. So like I try to have a relationship with the people I work with, but still have kind of a mini wall up in terms of I don't want to know too much. I don't want to know anything about the specifics of your personal life.
I can tell you from my perspective of my key people, there's no wall there and I know everything and it's not a problem and it's never been a problem. Though there are certainly other people that work here I know very little about, if nothing. It depends who the person is and their position. And I also believe there's work withs and there's work fors. The work withs are a gift from God and they work with you and there's never an issue with that. And then there's some people who need rules and need instruction and you got to stay on them coming and you got to know which are which. But I would never say, oh, you got to be careful not to get too personal. I would never make that comment because I have people with me for 20, 30, 40 years that I'm real tight with and it works.
You've never had anybody try to take advantage of that?
I'm thinking about it. I'm processing this as I'm saying this. I don't think I can think of an example where somebody that I knew about their issue and they expected me to just, okay, I guess I'll pay you for the next 6 months and don't come in. I've never had that. And I think it's because if you've got the right people, they get it. They're not unreasonable. So no, I really can't give you one time where I feel like someone's taken advantage of my relationship with them. I could give you 100 examples of weird, I always say, sometimes you got to fire the unwilling, the unable, or just the unexplainable, where people do stuff and you think like, oh my God, what were they thinking when they did? I certainly have had lots of weird things that have happened, but I've never had an employee who I had a good relationship with that I can think of, oh wow, I wish I wouldn't have gotten so friendly with them because now I got to fire them.
I mean, I haven't had anything recently, but so when I first working agency side, I was working with a friend of mine and she gave me the advice that I still do. She's like, or I try to do, where she's like, go to happy hour, but don't stay at happy hour. Don't try to be BFFs with the people that work for you.
Okay, now that I don't disagree with. I'm not going to their parties. That part I absolutely agree with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to use your employees as the basis of your social life, that's probably a really bad idea.
Yeah.
Or if you're naive enough to think they want you there. Like I stopped, not just recently, they'd have bowling parties and I used to go to them and I said,
they don't want you there.
You know what? They don't need me there. I don't.
They have to act differently in front of you.
Right. I'm no longer their contemporary. You got to remember, I started at 22. I used to be their contemporaries. Now I'm old enough to be their father. One of them said, Jay, my grandmother's younger than you are.
Did you fire her?
Well, we laughed, but her mother had her at 18 and her grandmother had her at 18. So I realized I'm old and I'm not even old to be their father anymore. I'm past their fathers and most of their fathers are younger than I am. So I recognize that it's okay. I don't get hurt feelings. I don't get invited to the weddings. It's okay.
I try to be aware of what's going on in my employees' personal lives because I do want to make accommodations if there's trouble. And what I've found is that for valuable employees, it's no problem. It's good to know what's going on at home. And because the pattern of my interaction with them is 99% of the time they're great employees and 2% of the time they're dealing with some disaster at home, that's okay. The ones that have been all disaster all the time, you don't want them in your company anyway. And so I've noticed a correlation between sort of dicier, I need a warm body hires, and you end up finding someone who's not all that qualified. Those people bring trouble to you constantly, and it's because they're a mess. And you can't really run a manufacturing organization with people who are a mess, so got to get rid of those people.
Or any business. Yes, that's true.
But what happens is, my concern is more the snowball effect of it. This is a long time ago, but we had a nanny for our children. And the nanny started having some personal issues. And then she would tell me about her relationship issues. And then her friend got injured and this and that. And it became this, every conversation we had was about her personal life and her issues. And then there was requests for accommodations. And I tried to be flexible, but those just kept going. And then when you look at them and you say, listen, you need to show up because this is your job and this is what you do. And I have an understanding about the stresses that you have right now. But I'm also paying you for a job and you're not delivering on that job. And then they look at you and they say, well, but you did it before, and that's what I'm.
That's just your classic mess of a person. That's what it looks like. That there's a constant drama, constant ratcheting up. And then they're astonished when it turns out that they can't leech off you forever.
You know what? Wait, Paul, let's be fair here. You just said they're a mess, they're a leech. Maybe they really have a life that's horrible and it's falling apart. And
he can't fix that.
Listen, I've been through that, and here's what I say to people like that. I say, wherever is bad about your life now, it's going to be way worse when I fire you. So straighten up. I'm happy to help someone who's making an effort or someone who has a bad patch, but is basically a decent person. But these people are just trying to ratchet it up. It's like, what do they think? They're going to get fired. They're used to it. I mean, in my experience, most of the people that I've encountered like that jump from job to job, and they do the same thing every time. They try to suck as much life out of it as possible, and then you get rid of them, and they're not even surprised. They've done it before.
There are certainly people like that out there. I'm certainly not arguing that. I'm just suggesting whether they're doing it because they're irresponsible or whether they really got horrible problems. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, this is what I said before. I have to balance taking care of the business and being the best human I can. And sometimes you have to say to them, I'm sorry you're going through this, but I got to tell you, I need someone here at 9 o'clock in the morning. If you can't do it, I'm going to have to fight. I'm not going to indict them with their trying to suck off me, their leeches, you need them to come to work every day. So yeah, there is a point to where there's no question that sometimes you just got to take care of the business. And that's unfortunate, but that is the way business is. You just can't always be a humanitarian.
You just got to learn to see it. And Sarah, it sounds like you ran into a person like this.
We had a member of the staff who had kind of announced that she was going to go and work remotely on the other side of the world. And I'm a relatively flexible person, and so I didn't say anything about it. And I was like, okay, we'll make it work. And it didn't work. It ended up really not working at all for a wide number of reasons, not just in terms of the distance. And so I looked at the team. I was like, I can't do that again. That's not going to happen again. If you want to work remotely within the 4 time zones of the U.S., that's fine. And they all looked at me and they're like, no, you're wrong. It depends on the person. And you know what? We can make it happen. And so now I have a person on my team who's going to go on to the other side of the world and work for a couple weeks. And I'm fine with it. I think I just was a little bit shell shocked by, bad experience.
I would have added just one word to that. Instead of saying, we'll make it work, I would have said, we'll try. That's all. We'll try to make it work. And that's all. But there's nothing wrong with, okay, we'll see. But yeah, there is a balancing act here regularly, and it's not black and white. And I got to tell you, I don't have those struggles anymore simply because I know I got to take care of business. But oh my God, 30 years ago, I had one drama after the other. I mean, it was a weekly event, and it was largely because I wasn't hiring properly and I wasn't checking references. It all starts with the hiring process.
Do you have a red flag that's a tell, like, oh my God, we're not going to do this? Or somebody's like, okay, that's going to be a fit for us? Like, do you have anything that you specifically look out for, both of you?
I can tell you our success rate for hiring now is probably 85%. It used to be 20. When we interview someone, first question I ask is, are you working now? No. Did you get fired or did you quit? Well, it was a mutual thing. Really? So you came in on Thursday and you went to quit and the boss goes, what a coincidence. I said, that sounds like complete bullshit. Like, what's the story? Why they left their job or why they want to leave is a critical piece of the puzzle I want to know. But my people are better at it than I am. And very seldom do they interview someone. They go, oh my God, I love this person. Very seldom does that not work out. But it's about setting your head to, yeah, we're going to spend a lot of time interviewing people because it's worth the trouble. And I can't tell you what a profound difference it had on my company. I've talked about this before. I hired a woman who was great at it. And when I interviewed her 25 years ago, I said to her, you're running a lighting show and there's 4 employees. How many did you have to hire to get to 4 good people? She goes, just 4. And I laughed out loud and I said, well, either you have lower standards than I have or you're a hiring savant. She was a hiring savant.
All right. Hey, I've got an alternate path which doesn't rely on finding that one genius out there. We write an ad that's very clear about what kind of company we are and what we're looking for. Both of those things, not just we're looking for something, but try to explain this is what the company you're joining is like. Then I review all the resumes, bring people in for interviews. In the resume reviewing phase, I've got a spreadsheet that scores. It's got like 10 questions, and I give a point for each yes and a 0 for each no. And they're just relevant questions, like how far is the drive? If someone's got to drive 3 hours to get to work every day, ain't gonna happen.
I'm with you. Absolutely.
How fast did they respond to, whatever the communication was? Does it look like they can spell? Can they write? Have they had training? Have they been in another similar job? Just a bunch of things that I think are relevant. And so if you're trying to evaluate a whole pile of candidates, if you put them all through one matrix, you'll get differences in the score that'll give you some information about who do you want to bring in for an interview. Then for the interview, it's the same thing. We not only give a skills test, but also, did they show up on time? Did they have a pencil? Did they dress up at all? Like anything you think is important, go ahead and make the score. And I find that it really helps weed out people who are not going to work, because you could be like, this is a lovely person, but they've had no training. They've never worked in the industry, blah, 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 blah. Sorry about that. And you then have to apply your soft skills to it. But just trying to systematize the hiring process and make it into something which isn't different every time is a huge step forward in getting decent people.
I agree 100%. And there are many business owners that will go, oh, it's always a crapshoot. That's not true. That is simply not true. It isn't a crapshoot, right?
It's not a crapshoot. Nothing's a crapshoot. There's no such thing as a crapshoot.
You use a good word. You have a process. And when you have a process that makes sense, your hiring success goes from 25% up to, I don't know that anybody's got 95%, but maybe people that are great at it got it to 90, but what a difference that makes in your company. I mean, the amount of energy it takes to hire and fire and redo it, it starts with the hiring. And from my experience talking to business owners, most of them that I talk to put very little time into it, and they pay the price for it.
Sarah, this is the first time you've been on the podcast in a little while. How are things going? How's your year started?
So January for marketing and PR tends to be a very slow space because most brands are figuring out their budgets for the year and just kind of starting to get out there. We came into January in a good space. We have 2 new part-time people that are working with us, what we're excited about. And we have a nice fluid workflow. I have worked really hard to kind of get myself out of the weeds. So I've really been focused on, doing everything I can in terms of building new biz, specifically doing a little bit more when it comes to responding to requests for proposal, which if you have ever worked on one of them, it can be like a college application. I just got one from the city of San Francisco. That's 120 pages. So trying to create kind of a process for responding those, and also just doing things that will make us more visible for those larger ongoing government contracts, specifically, looking into registering ourselves as a women-owned, women-run business. I was told by a couple of different sources that can be beneficial just in terms of our win rate and getting in on bigger projects. So we're working on that, which is also like a college application.
Sarah, do you think that would help in general or specifically going after government work?
Going after government work. So the one thing that was interesting for us is that we apply for government work, even doing like tourism or PR for a city or a town. We would respond to these pitches, right, with a great package and this and that. And we would get to the very end and they'd look at us and they'd say, we really loved you. You were one of the last 2 people that we companies that we considered, but you don't have a .org. You've never worked on a .org or a .gov. And so last year, by happenstance, we got pulled into working on the big APEC conference here in San Francisco. And so we ended up working with the city of San Francisco and doing a lot of work. So we got our .gov. And so now we have .gov experience. So we're putting a little bit more work into some of these larger government contracts. And the reason why is that, that money's stable. Like once they allocate it, and it's usually for 3-year contracts. So it would be nice bread and butter for us. And I think that would be a nice kind of just a basis of revenue for the company so we can, still have fun with some not so stable clients and still do those projects that we like to do. Like we just did Fan Expo, which is a big Comic-Con here in San Francisco, but that's only, a couple months a year that we're preparing for that. So we need those stable clients where we know the paycheck is always coming.
How many different organizations do you have to get quote unquote certification from, for lack of a better word? It's not just one, right? Is there a bunch of them? City, state, U.S. government for women-owned status?
I would say that the in my experience, the basic one to get is the federal government designation. That once you're in those databases, most other organizations are fine with that. Because we had to go get, it's not a huge lift, but to get certified as a small business to be eligible for certain federal contracts.
Did you do it yourself? Did you hire somebody to do that for you?
No, I did it a long time ago, and there are pitfalls, but it wasn't impossible for a moderately dedicated person to figure it out. I wouldn't start with a consultant for that. That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, we have one issue, though. So my company wasn't my company for 2 years. I had a parent company. So sometimes they ask for financial records that we don't have because we're just filing our first year taxes back in business by ourselves. So I haven't hit that question yet, but I'm bracing myself for it.
Well, that might be a problem. When I applied for all this stuff, it was probably 1999 or something, and I'd been in business for a couple of decades at that point. And so when they ask you for, I can't even remember what the burden of proof was. One thing is you might have to get state certification because we just had to go through that.
I don't even know, Paul, what are you talking? I mean, I get the woman-owned. What kind of small business certification? I've never even heard of such a thing.
Well, are you under $100 million a year or under 500 employees? I mean,
yes,
most of us are. But that opens you up to, there's a lot of contracts in the federal government that are set aside specifically for small businesses. Not micro businesses, but just small by their definition, which can be fairly substantial business. But the other thing is that when you're working in certain contracts, the main contractor, a Lockheed Martin or somebody like that, is often either required or encouraged to do subcontracting with small businesses.
There's a percentage of the contract that has to be given to a small business.
Yeah.
So it can even be a larger marketing agency that wins a major contract, but because they're above a size, they have to dole out some of it to smaller agencies.
Right. I mean, once you're in the world of federal contracting, there's all these different designations, and there's a lot of organizations that exist merely to be one of those designations, like service disabled small veteran-owned business or whatever. And there's just a huge ecosystem of people who have that, do nothing but identify federal contracts, and then start looking for somebody who can actually do the work. I'm working on a job like that right now, where there's a contractor who's got a special designation, who's sort of got the inside track to get this work on a military base, but they don't have any idea how to do it. So they went and found me, and it might work out. We actually get quite a few opportunities that are like that, where there's a contract, there's somebody can check a lot of boxes, and then we're the subcontractor for that.
See, you're in a real business. You're in office furnishings. I'm not I don't think picture framing or art, I don't know that there's such a thing as a big vendor they're going to anyway. So I don't know if.
I don't know. I mean, you think about a major museum, for example, like the National Archive or something like that. They probably have framing services that they need. And there's probably part of that contract that has to go to a smaller business.
From what I know about that, they usually do it internally because they're dealing, and that's not something I don't want to be dealing with $3 million pieces of art. So,
all right, well, that's you, Jay. I mean, there might be somebody out there listening who thinks it's useful.
I get it. That makes sense. Well, congratulations, Sarah. It sounds like you're figuring some stuff out, and you got a good plan.
I am. It's not, it's not a seamless process. I don't know. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read a lot of, insights. I haven't figured this out. I'm learning something new every day. I make mistakes every day. And I'm really just trying to build a business and get past, the revenue number that we've been at for 2 years. It's how do I do it? And last year was terrible. I mean, last year we had, a number of clients leave because they ran out of money and the economy wasn't so great. And people are starting to come back, but it's slow. And I'm also a little bit more apprehensive about diving in too deep, where, you look at these companies that say, oh, well, we have this money for a retainer, and we can do this and that. And then the first thing that goes is outside agencies when things get hard. So how do I staff up for a new client with, you just never, I feel unsettled still.
Sarah, what do you mean by diving in too deep? Are you referring to hiring people to take on a client like that, not knowing for sure that the work's going to remain?
Right. I love staff. I love having staff. I love people being on staff. I love giving them the perks and creating an environment that's welcoming and, doing all of those things. But, if a client comes to me and, says, hey, I'm going to give you this huge retainer, and I'm still going to be apprehensive about hiring people onto staff because I've been impacted by retainers leaving because their business didn't go well, right? So I'm gun shy.
You're in a tough, garbage pickup. They get picked their, to talk about a recurring revenue. They don't have to worry about losing an account. In your business, they thought all the stuff was going to happen and you're working on it. It didn't happen too quick.
And here's the thing, Jay, is that, you talk to so many agency owners and they'll be like, oh, well, we don't do anything for under $10,000 a month. To me, I find more security if I were to have 25 clients at $5,000 a month versus 10 clients at $10,000. Because one of those goes, I'm fine. But one of the big guys goes, and I'm like, okay, this keeps me up at night. So
no,
do I build a business that's based on smaller retainers?
So let's do some math on that, though. So let's say $5,000 a month is $60,000 a year.
Sure.
And let's say that PR is a quarter of their marketing budget. So that means their marketing budget's $250.
Yep.
Which means this is probably a $5 to $10 million company.
Yeah, when we look for new businesses, we're really the minimum for us would be a $5 million company.
Which makes perfect sense because the person doing 3 is simply not going to have the resources and
it's money too close to their pocket. They take it personally, and they usually don't have somebody dedicated to managing an agency.
You're talking to someone who it's been all of them. I was the $3 million company. I was the $5 million company. So now I'm big enough that I do have a person dedicated to it. So you're right. It makes perfect sense what you're saying, because in the beginning, when you're doing 5, it was like an idea your brother-in-law told you at dinner, or like, why don't you get a PR firm? Right. Oh, yeah, we should do that. And then they don't know what they're getting into. And then they're, well, wait, it's been a month. I haven't seen anything coming. That's a tough learning curve. And then, yeah, it's so I think you're right. I think the $10 million company, been around for a while, doing enough volume, probably understand the PR world a little more, and is probably a more stable client.
Who's had experience having a PR agency. Those are the ideal,
Yeah.
The people that understand the value of PR and have worked with an agency in the past, those are our ideal customer. That said, we work with a lot of really cool, interesting startup companies that have never had PR. But they also have great stories to tell. And so we get excited about them. And then some of them are just they work out really well. And then there are others that want to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal within the first 2 weeks of working with them. And we know pretty quickly that they're not going to be a long-term client.
Well, that's crazy. We know that takes 4 weeks or 5 weeks. So,
Yes. Or 5 years.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we are out of time here. My thanks to Paul Downs, Jay Goltz, and Sarah Segal, and to our sponsor, The Great Game of Business, which helps businesses use an open book management system to build healthier companies. You can learn more at greatgame.com. Thanks, everybody. Wait, don't leave yet. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like the 21 Hats owners to address, send it to me by replying to your morning report or by email at lauren@21hats.com. That's LOREN@21hats.com. Do it now before you forget. And don't be afraid to tell Jay what you really think. He can take it. And if you got something out of this conversation, help us reach more business owners. Tell a friend. Subscribe and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter. Subscribe to the Morning Report at 21hats.com. This episode was produced by Jess Thuberon, founder of Blank Word Productions. Okay, now you can leave. Thanks for listening, everyone.